In Chicago, 10 McDonald's locations are now using artificial intelligence to accept drive-through orders. Flippy is a hamburger flipping machine designed by Miso Robotics, and the US hamburger chain White Castle is now planning to introduce an additional 10 Flippies in its locations after a successful trial in 2020. Chick-fil-A has partnered with KiwiBot to start test delivering fried chicken sandwiches. Domino's, now a self-described technology company that sells pizza, has invested in autonomous pizza delivery cars. There's very clearly a big trend at play here, and that is where technology is starting to replace laborers in the fast food industry. And while most of this is driven by a labor shortage in this industry, there's actually a much bigger force at play here. In fact, there are many different industries that are being impacted by the current economic situation, which is what we'll be exploring in this video, understanding why crisis accelerates technology. To get a big picture idea of what's really going on here, we need to look at an equation to understand how businesses think about economic crisis. Now, what usually happens in an economic crisis is the break-even volume equation is disturbed in some way. You don't really need to fully understand the break-even volume equation other than the fact that it helps companies decide how many products they need to sell in order to operate at a profit. Now, what usually happens in times of economic crisis is the variables in that equation are drastically changed. So much so that it actually puts companies in a position where they're to the left of the break-even point, therefore they're operating at a loss. And it is then up to the companies to figure out a way to go from the left side of the break-even point back to the right side of the break-even point, so they're back operating in a profit. And in times of economic crisis, the companies that can't figure this out are the ones that go extinct, while the ones that can figure this out in a very big way are the ones that explode with growth. So break-even volume is basically defined as fixed costs divided by the sales price minus the variable cost per unit. And really, when we talk about fixed costs, that's things like labor, rent, utilities, insurance. When we talk about variable cost per unit, that's materials, commissions, delivery costs like gas, credit card fees. And when we talk about sales price, that's the actual amount that companies charge for their product or their service. And as you're listening along with me, you're probably starting to see how all these different variables that I'm listing have been changing in a very big way over the past couple of years. Rising costs of goods and labor are suddenly changing the equation, and it's having companies reevaluate what they need to do to go back to the right side of the break-even point. Another general concept that I think is important to understand is that these types of economic situations happen in cycles. In fact, Neil Howe and William Strauss actually wrote a book called The Fourth Turning, which basically divides history in the US into 4 main cycles or turnings that happen every 80 or so years. And it closely follows the generations that people live in. So approximately how long the average American's lifespan is about how long the entire 4 turnings will take to happen. And so they're dividing this period of time into 4 different turnings, which are the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis. And if we look back at history, a lot of the times of crisis in American history happened just about every 80 years. We look at the Revolutionary War, we look at the Civil War, we look at World War II. And then now in the time period from 2015 to about 2028, we are in what would be expected to be yet another example of a time of crisis. Now, this doesn't have to be war. It can be some other form of crisis that just causes the world to have to reassess the situation and rebalance life as it is. Now, while this model is not necessarily 100% accurate, and there may be the possibility that we are actually not in a crisis era, it is important to understand that history does repeat itself. And so I want to look back at the most recent crisis era and how technology was influential in that time, so we can actually see how technology accelerating in times of crisis. So if we do a quick Google search, we can see that the Great Depression happened between August 1929 and sometime in 1939. So about a 10-year period. The Depression-era economist Joseph Schumpeter emphasized the positive consequences of downturns, and this is specifically during the Depression. he observed that there was the destruction of underperforming companies, the release of capital from dying sectors to new industries, and the movement of high-quality skilled workers towards stronger employers. So while we may not be in a depression now, the movement of high-quality workers explains why fast food workers are finding new jobs. This is driving technology development in the fast food sector. In another graph I'll show you, which was reproduced by economist Alfred Kleinknecht, it shows patent activity from 1715 to 1970. It tracks actual patents granted from 1901 to 2005, and there are clear spikes of innovative activity during the Long Depression of the 1870s and 1880s and the Great Depression of the 1930s. And another economic historian, Alexander Field, found that the 1930s tended to be the most technologically progressive decade of the 20th century. Just some quick examples of companies that changed their approach with technologies in order to stay alive and go back on the profit side of the break-even point. We can look at Radio Corporation of America, which is the high-tech company whose stock bludgeoned during the Great Crash. They returned to profitability in 1934 as it shifted its innovation from old technology like the radio to a brand new emerging television market. We can also look at how in 1930, DuPont research scientist Wallace Carothers recorded the initial discovery of neoprene, which is synthetic rubber. And although the company's price levels and sales fell by roughly 10 to 15% respectively that year, DuPont boosted R&D spending to develop the new technology commercially. So a buyer's market for research scientists and low material costs pieced together were able to help the company keep the cost of its research investments manageable. And as a result, neoprene, which DuPont publicly announced in November of 1931 and introduced commercially in 1937, became one of the 20th century's major inventions. By 1939, every automobile and airplane manufactured in the United States had neoprene components, all because a company innovated during times of crisis. And what we can see here is that during times of crisis, perhaps labor costs are lowered because more people are willing to do work for a little bit less money just to have some form of income. Workers shift to better opportunities, so it causes companies to need to reassess the way that they operate. And then lastly, which I've already stressed, is that companies need to innovate in order to recover profitability. Many times there isn't a way out of that loss scenario without having to innovate the product to be able to restore the balance of the break-even volume equation. Is it really just the fast food industry that's impacted today? Well, at the time of this video, there is yet another potential crisis on the horizon with high gas prices, grocery bills, rising electronics costs, expensive real estate. Well, pretty much everything is expensive. There will definitely be some changes as a result that require companies to pivot or innovate to return to profitability. The real question is, what companies will those be? So yeah, it's not just fast food. It's going to impact every single industry in some shape or form. And the question that companies will be asking themselves is, how do I return to profitability? They can do this by cutting costs like labor, materials, or delivery costs. And companies that are labor intensive may switch to automation technologies like AI. Shipping intensive companies may start using self-driving trucks and automated packaging systems to avoid having to pay for people to do this work. Companies that are very intensive and tied to the cost of materials may rely on technologies like quantum computing to reinvent new technologies that are lower cost and easier to access. And to take this even further, companies will also be thinking about how to increase revenue, which can be done with new products or selling more of the products that they already have. This can be done with automation technology, helping solve a problem for another business and offering that as a product or a service. Again, material inventions that companies can come up with that are more competitive than other materials on the market. New technologies like blockchain and Web3 bringing a better experience to a consumer or a business, and so many more possibilities that can drive innovation in new products that help companies return back to profitability. And if you've ever heard the saying, sell shovels to gold miners in a gold rush, well, that's pretty much what's going to happen in this case. The companies that come up with solutions to the problems that companies and people are facing in this economic crisis, whenever that does happen, are the ones that are going to experience that explosive growth. So solutions that help automate repetitive mental tasks or repetitive physical tasks, or solutions that come up with new materials to deliver better products, will cause companies to explode with growth. So if you're in a job that has repetitive physical tasks like a restaurant cook or a truck driver, or you're in a job that has repetitive mental tasks like taking orders or communicating information over and over again, or your job requires people to go through you to do business, yet that process could be easily done over the internet or using AR or VR, artificial intelligence or robots, well, I would say that you should probably be worried about how the next economic crisis will impact your profession or your business. Because if that break-even volume equation, well, breaks, you're gonna have to look at new ways to running your business or find a new job. If it does turn out that your role or your company is replaced by a new and more effective technology. I did make another video about when robots will take all jobs, which is a pretty interesting one, which I'll link in the description here. But in that, we talked about some of the least risk jobs and careers and some of the most risk jobs careers. And you'll want to check out that video if you want to learn more from that perspective. But the way you'll be able to really win big when technology shifts, create layoffs, or put companies out of business is by learning the new and valuable skills that relate to the new technologies. It'll be by identifying the trends that will impact your industry. It'll be identifying trends that create new industries, trends that will cause industries to grow, and then lastly, by understanding the key technologies driving change. If you'd like to learn more about how to use exponential technologies and frameworks to achieve growth in your career or your business, I'll add a link down below in the description where you can join our currently free Slack group for tech power leaders, where you'll be able to keep up to date with the latest trends, network with other people who are tech savvy leaders, and so much more to be coming soon. As technology continues to progress at a faster and faster rate, really being able to keep up with all of the latest trends and technologies is becoming more and more important if you're an executive, an entrepreneur, or just someone in a professional career who wants to move on in a big way. So to wrap things up, really, if you're following me all the way through this video, you've probably realized how things are going to change quite a bit during times of economic crisis, whether it's new technologies, new ways of doing business. It's important to be aware of these changes, so whether you're working in a job or running a business, you know how to surf the wave instead of being collapsed on by the wave. So really, to wrap things up, if you've been following along with me in this video, it's pretty clear that while economic crisis or change happens, many things are impacted, and it creates technological innovation, changes in the way that companies operate, and not being aware of these different forces at play can be like playing with fire. It's very dangerous. So I hope this was informative to you and encouraged you to start thinking about some of the technologies and trends that are impacting the world at this very moment. If you enjoyed watching this video and you want to see more content related to technology and how it impacts the future of health, relationships, business, and so much more, make sure to hit the subscribe button below, and we'll see you next time. Peace.